Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the UN calls for a murderous mob of Central African soldiers to be held to account. The troops publicly stabbed a suspected rebel before burning his remains. It's a breakdown of the fabric of society, warn diplomats. Also, a tragic outcome at the Dawn Cop gold mine in South Africa as the bodies of 8 trapped workers are recovered from the blazing shaft. One more is still missing. And with the number of elephants being hit hard across Africa, we head to Kenya, where authorities are hoping the fight back against poaching will buck the trend. First up, after yesterday's gruesome public lynching of a suspected rebel by Central African soldiers, the UN's chief in the country has warned of the breakdown of justice and order and called on the interim government to hold those responsible to account. African peacekeepers who watched the slaying say that they were powerless to stop it.
It is very unfortunate that that happened, that, we were not able to quickly intervene and then save it. But things happened so quickly that we couldn't.
Well, the slaying happened shortly after troops had been addressed by President Samba Panza on her hopes of restoring stability. Since the Seleka rebel takeover last year, Central African Republic has seen escalating violence. Christian militia have increasingly targeted Muslim communities, whilst Human Rights Watch today said that Seleka fighters are continuing to target civilians in the north. Well, France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent is in the capital, Bangui. She tells us about the government's response to yesterday's brutality by the military.
We've spoken to people close to the new president, Catherine Samba Panza, and she's said to be extremely angry at this attack, which came just after she'd given a rallying speech to armed forces, urging them to get involved in stabilising the country. I myself, just a short time ago, spoke to the new Minister for Reconciliation and Communication, and she said to me the Central African Republic's government had taken into account the words from the UN Special Envoy in Bangui calling for exemplary sanctions. But she insisted the government is on the same track as the international community here. She also told me that this lynching on Wednesday was not representative of the whole of the situation in Bangui, which she said has stabilised, although admitting there are still pockets of violence. And she said that the government is now working on an inquiry to try and arrest and capture those involved. She says the government does aim to try and bring to justice all those involved in killings and retaliation attacks. But she admitted very frankly that at the moment the Central African Republic doesn't have the means, the funds or the organisation to do that, and is calling, in fact, for more help on that front from the international community.
Now, it's not just the problems in terms of getting official institutions like the military and the justice system back on track. There's a lot of anger and mistrust that's built up between communities themselves over the last year. What's the government doing about that?
Well, they're trying to get the country stabilised, but it is a huge task. They admit that themselves. Down on street level, there's still a lot of anger around. I mean, tensions are very visible. We were today filming in an area where all the Muslim population have fled. The people living there now are Christians, and they say they do not want the Muslim population back. And there are scenes of pillaging, burned houses. We've heard revenge attacks in several areas. There's still a lot of anger on street level, and that's one of the things that the new president and her team are going to have to tackle if they want to solve this problem at the roots.
Catherine Norris-Trent there for us. In South Africa, a memorial service was held on Thursday after the bodies of 8 missing gold miners were found a mile underground inside a burning shaft. They'd been trapped by a rockfall believed to have been triggered by an earthquake at the Harmony Gold's Doornkop mine not far from Johannesburg. Rescue teams are still looking for a 9th missing worker. Operators say that a full inquiry into what happened can't start until everyone is accounted for.
We cannot start the investigation until we have found the last person. And then we need to make sure that the underground workings are stable and safe so that if anybody enters in those areas, that we won't have more issues. And that obviously includes the investigation and the full investigation by the DMR. We cannot go into these areas unless they've been declared safe.
Tunisia Thursday marked 12 months since the assassination of a top opposition figure kicked off a political crisis from which the country has only recently started to emerge. Well, this week, authorities said the man suspected of gunning down Chokri Belaid had himself been killed in a police shootout. Belaid's death was the first of two blamed on Islamic extremists and triggered massive anti-government protests. Well, today vigils were held, but Belaid's family say that they still have questions about the circumstances surrounding the murder. Authorities blame Salafist group Ansar al-Sharia. Some suspect there may be more to it, though. France 24's Misha Benoit-Lavelle's in Tunis. He tells us more about the crackdown on extremism sparked by the assassination.
The last year has certainly been one of instability and uncertainty, particularly stemming from the threat of violence from Islamist radicals who security officials say were behind the killings of Chokri Belaid and Mohamed Brahmi. We should remember that violence attributed to radical Islamist groups, in particular the jihadist group Ansar al-Sharia, was not limited to those assassinations. Security officials also said that the terrorist cell holed up in the Shambi mountain in Tunisia's interior were also members of that group. Over a dozen soldiers and National Guardsmen lost their lives trying to apprehend that group. The violence also had indirect effects on Tunisia's stability after security forces led a harsh crackdown on Ansar Sharia and its supporters following the government's classification of the group as a terrorist organization. Some say that crackdown came at the expense of basic rights of some Tunisians. For example, Human Rights Watch accused security forces of arbitrary arrest and torture.
Hundreds gathered in Niamey today in protest against the nuclear company Areva. It's mostly owned by France and is currently holding tense negotiations with Niger's government over tax, while the potential deal is just one of several delicate negotiations faced by the government.
Niger's President Mahamadou Issoufou faces several thorny issues. First of all, nuclear giant Areva. This Thursday, several hundred people protested against the company, 80% of which is owned by France. For months, Areva and Niger have been negotiating the renewal of contracts for 2 uranium mines. Areva is reluctant to accept a law voted in 2006, which would lead to a rise in its taxes.
We call on Niger's government to implement this law, but Areva refuses. It says the price of uranium has gone down, but Areva has forgotten that for years it exploited Niger's uranium at a very low price.
Niger is the world's 4th biggest uranium producer, but it ranks last in the UN's Human Development Index. President Issoufou is also concerned by the situation in Libya. The government says Western powers brought about the fall of Gaddafi and that this led to extremists settling in southern Libya. Niamey believes these powers should now intervene in the region which borders Niger. President Issoufou has let France and the US deploy drones in his country to boost the surveillance of jihadists. Niger is also rocked by political tensions. Issoufou's allies accuse the president of the National Assembly, Ama Amadou, of wanting to interrupt the democratic process. Amadou, a former ally of Issoufou, could run against him in the 2016 presidential election. It's in this context that several journalists were briefly arrested this year for criticizing the president.
Elephant populations across Africa are being decimated by poaching because of the high demand for ivory in Asian markets. Tanzania and countries in Central and West Africa have been particularly badly hit, but one relative bright spot is Kenya. Our Duncan Woodside reports.
Flying low over TSAVO National Park, a census is underway to count the elephant population here. Keeping an accurate tally is a challenge. The pilots and spotters carry out dummy runs ahead of the proper count.
You're trying to record an awful lot of information, plus looking for the wildlife. So you're taking GPS waypoints on everything. You're also having to estimate the numbers, photograph, if it's large herds of elephant, try and photograph them with a camera.
Metal rods, known as streamers, are secured to the wings of each plane to minimize double counting.
Streamers are basically your guideline. So you're counting a 500-meter side, 500 meters out this side and 500 meters out this side at 300 feet.
The last elephant census here in TSAVO was in 2011. That showed a population of just over 12,500, a 7% increase on a 2008 count. Organisers are hoping for a further increase, bucking the continental trend.
Kenya Wildlife Service has invested a lot in terms of security, having rangers deployed strategically in different areas, and activities such as this, what we are carrying out today, that is able to identify some of the critical where the elephants are distributed, has been able to assist us to be able to mitigate the effects of poaching.
But the apparent stabilisation of the elephant population here in Kenya isn't mirrored elsewhere. According to Save the Elephants, numbers in Tanzania's Ruaha National Park have plunged by nearly half to barely 20,000 over the last 7 years.
That wraps up African news from me. I will be back with more tomorrow, though. I'll hand you back now, though, for more news and headlines to Mark Owen.